We may have been around the world, but one place we haven't travelled much is here in our home country of New Zealand. This might not encapsulate everything, but it is a good little look at what the rich and complex Māori culture has to offer. We're still learning about the Māori culture, but like everywhere else around the world, the people and the nature have a strong relationship. After all, food is the essence of life, and you get food from the land, the sea, and the sky. We're about to head over to the Papatuanuku Kokiri Marae in Māngere in South Auckland. Māngere used to be known as a huge, thriving food bowl before it became much more urbanized. Here at the marae, they're about to hold the Fire Food Festival, also known as Te Ahi Kōmau, inspired by the traditional Polynesian method of cooking by burying food in the ground with hot coals and rocks and covering it to create a natural oven. There are also performances, arts and crafts to look forward to, so let's go. Before we get started, this event is happening on the 30th to the 31st of October 2020. At this stage, New Zealand is on alert level 1, which means there are no restrictions on crowds, gatherings, or mask usage. However, we still do maintain basic health practices and keep track of where our locations are using our app. We highly recommend following your government's guidelines on social distancing and any other COVID restrictions that may be in place in your country. Currently, we feel really safe about how COVID is being handled in New Zealand. Otherwise, we wouldn't be filming or going out in this sort of situation. Okay, now I'm hungry. Let's go!
Entrance to the event was free. Ticket reservation was encouraged. Though no one was turned away at the entrance, certain meal tickets also required ordering in advance.
This was in particular the Hungi cooked by the marae, a vegan Hungi, steamed pudding, umu, and mata ahi. We recommend pre-ordering the Hungi and the mata ahi as they were quick to sell out. There was plenty of umu and steamed pudding to go around during the day. The event kicked off with a powerful fire dance from the Mexican Samoan Keanu Lucio.
Throughout the day, there were various performances presenting the diversity of Polynesian islands.
The most important event of the day was the Poffidi. A Poffidi is a traditional welcoming ceremony which involves hosts welcoming guests in an exchange of speeches and singing.
A Poffidi starts with a representative from the hosts, usually an older woman, offering a karanga, a call of welcome to the guests.
A woman from the visitors will respond as the guests enter via procession. As the two groups face each other, there are speeches and waiata, most of which are in Te Reo Māori. There was also a kapa haka by local students.
The Poffidi was only on the first day of the event, as a sort of opening ceremony with the Papatuanuku Kokiri Marae as the hosts. This year, the guests included Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff.
If you aren't part of the Māori community, it is not often that you'll experience a Poffidi in New Zealand. There are experiences aimed at tourists, such as part of marae stays or in tour groups that feature events focusing on Māori culture. If you're lucky, growing up in New Zealand, you might also experience one during a school trip. Hangi is a traditional Polynesian method of cooking food where meat and vegetables are buried in the ground with hot stones and wood, preferably manuka for its flavor, forming an oven called umu. The earth acts as an insulator and the heat cooks the food slowly for at least 3 hours.
There's also a steaming method, where added moisture from vegetation or water turns to steam and assists the process by increasing pressure. Traditionally, the food was wrapped in leaves for burying, though nowadays you're more likely to see them portioned out in foil boxes like these ones.
Hangi is typically organized as a meal to feed a huge crowd, such as for a food festival like this one, or on special occasions thanks to the laborious processes required to dig the ground and prepare the food.
Now, government permission is also required to lay a hangi. The hangi that we got from the marae contained 3 kinds of meat, as is fairly standard: chicken, beef, and lamb, as well as cabbage, wedges of pumpkin, hunks of potato, carrot, kumara, and, likely thanks to British influence, some stuffing.
Thanks to the long, slow cooking, the meat was meltingly tender. Everything was lightly seasoned with just enough salt to flavor the proteins, allowing the fatty meat and the sweetness of the vegetables to speak for themselves. The flavor of each ingredient was infused by each other and the herbs used in the stuffing, resulting in a flavor that would not have been achieved if they had been cooked separately.
It's really well seasoned. I can taste the thyme, especially strong.
It is, as people might find, almost ordinary tasting. The ingredients used are akin to a British roast, but it is the unique method of cooking as well as the appreciation of the labour and time involved, which makes Hungi a meal to enjoy.
It really is an experience that's not to be missed if you have an opportunity to taste it for yourselves.
The vegetarian Hungi is much simpler. There was pumpkin, potato, kumara, carrots, and cabbage, as well as stuffing that incorporated kidney beans and chickpeas as described on the pre-order form.
Arguably, this version was much more smoky and earthy than the meat Hungi, though personally I found it to be less well seasoned than the traditional one.
Umu is the oven that is formed when sealing hot rocks in the ground, also called a luau.
This meal came with lamb flanks, taro, green bananas, chicken, and ribs, all cooked in similar methods.
Disappointingly, the meat was a little tough, most likely as it had cooled down during the process of making up the plates, so we ended up stashing most of the umu in a paper bag for dinner the next day. It was a lot better heated up. The best part of the umu was the taro leaves. The taro leaves were mixed with coconut cream, liberally salted, and wrapped in foil for cooking. The earthiness of the leaves mixed with the sweet, fragrant coconut cream, whose sugar is cooked in a smoky caramel caked in the tin foil, made for one of the most decadent vegetable dishes we've ever experienced. Steamed pudding, also known as purini mamoa, is a Māori dish with clear British influences.
The basic mix consists of butter, sugar, flour, eggs, and a leavening agent, though most notably it also contains golden syrup and mixed spices like cinnamon and ginger. It's then served with any combination of cream, custard, or even butterscotch sauce, though in this case it was just a simple custard. It is unsurprising that the steamed pudding we enjoyed was not an unfamiliar flavor.
With a dense, exceptionally moist texture, fragrant from the syrup and the spices, and creamy from the custard, it was simple, delicious, and very well balanced. If this was a dessert you grew up with, I'm sure it'd be something you'd crave often.
If you want a fusion, a ruko pie is the perfect example of traditional ethnic food reimagined into something mind-bogglingly delicious.
Ruko hut in Papatoetoe incorporates ruko into a savoury pie. The ruko pie is named as one of the top 100 iconic eats of Auckland, and we can really see why.
Taro leaves cook up exceptionally tender, similar to the spinach, though with less of the shrinkage and a fragrance like banana or even tea leaves.
When paired with a mildly sweet, creamy coconut and a flaky pastry that just gives away to the teeth, this small pie packs an incredible punch.
The corned beef was shredded into bite-sized pieces and equally tender, but with the rich and savory combination of taro leaves and coconut, I don't think I would even miss anything if it was just a simple vegetarian pie.
Overall, it's without a doubt one of the most delicious eats that we encountered in the festival.
I can tell that if these were being sold in the middle of the market instead of in the corner, it would sell out fast.
Come on home when nobody's been amazed, and I miss your ginger hair and the way you like to dress. Oh, come on, I want you come
We
on
had
home.
to try a plate of some of the Samoan classics, which came at $5 for a small size and $10 for a large size. We opted for a small plate and chose to omit the rice, instead requesting our dish to contain both the mains and a side in a smaller portion. They offered chop suey, a Chinese-influenced dish consisting of vermicelli cooked in soy sauce, minus, which is potato salad stained bright pink with beetroot juice, and strips of steak all topped with a creamy mushroom sauce.
The potato salad was creamy but not cloying, the vermicelli flavorful and salty, the steak a perfect texture of chewy with no hint of toughness, and the creamy mushroom sauce just exactly as it is, creamy with a few pieces of mushroom. It was nothing spectacular, and yet it was homey and nostalgic, reminiscent of a dish we ate as children called pastel tutu, essentially an Indonesian answer to shepherd's pie, with vermicelli to bulk up the mince filling. This kind of food won't please a gastronome, but it's food that hits the soul, fills you up, and takes people right back home.
Fritters are a common dish in New Zealand, the most traditional kind being whitebait fritters. Kiwi Tucker's seafood fritters consist of finely chopped vegetables and your choice of seafood in a thin batter that's shallow fried on a hot griddle and served on a slice of bread. An over easy egg is an extra $1. Our order of a single mussel fritter took well over 15 minutes, but it was worth it, quickly becoming one of the most delicious things of the night. It's Joe's pick for sure.
The thinness of the batter allowed it to spread and form a ring around the toppings, and when cooked with a liberal amount of oil, formed a perfectly golden brown crust with an unbelievably light crispness.
The vegetables had just a bit of crunch, and when paired with a generous portion of chewy, tender, creamy plump mussels on top of a lightly fried slice of white bread, it made for a combination of flavors and textures that is inexplicably moorish and satisfying at the same time. This dish would be absolutely fantastic with just a squeeze of fresh lemon.
We thought it was perfect the way it was, without any egg or added sauces, but we're kind of boring like that. After all, to each their own. The mataahi was one of the biggest expectations for us that night. On the order form, mataahi is described as spit-roasted pork served as a sandwich and fried bread topped with nasturtium, kawa pesto, and watercress aioli. The pig was roasted all night up until 8:30 p.m. Our friend who went the day after did manage to catch them carving and serving the whole pig early in the evening, so perhaps there was a small hitch this time round, but no matter.
Nasturtium and kawa are both edible New Zealand weeds with medicinal properties and peppery flavors. The Papatuanuku Kokiri Marae grow their own. No doubt the ingredients for the pesto come straight from their garden. Fried bread is also a common Polynesian snack or dish, though the combination of these ingredients to form a sandwich is glaringly obvious. It's a fantastic way of incorporating local ingredients to make a showstopper dish.
Though the bread was cold and no longer crispy, possibly due to the delays in the completion of cooking of the pork, it had a light sweetness and perfect chewy texture and a density to withstand a generous quantity of the most juicy, succulent, tender hunks of pork, creamy, spicy watercress aioli, fresh herbaceous pesto, and a gratuitous sprig of mesclun salad.
Every component was phenomenal, but without a doubt the pesto was beyond expectations. The peppery, mustardy herbs complemented the rich pork and sweetbread so well. It's no wonder that this pesto, served on kumara, claimed a spot in the top 100 iconic Auckland eats. The Papatuanuku Kokiri Marae standing proud amongst a list of the most famous eateries in Auckland. It's well deserved and no one will be able to convince us otherwise.
To close the evening, a half-hour light show was projected onto the trees on the property of the marae. The story was voiced and played through speakers.
Tane, the biggest and strongest of them all, placed his hands to his father's chest and pushed.
It told the origins of fire according to the Māori folklore, starting from the creation of the earth to how fire was stolen by Polynesia's favorite demigod trickster, Maui.
The lights are difficult to follow on the texture of the trees, but through the lens of the camera, the images are much more distinct. This medium of projecting lights onto a surface is likely not unique, but in remembering that the festival focused on the appreciation of the land and seeing the leaves rippling in the wind added an eerie yet enrapturing effect that perfectly suited the theme of the festival.
We were exposed to Māori culture growing up in New Zealand, but there's significantly less prevalence of it in everyday life once you're out of primary school. This festival was something that we anticipated might teach us more about the Māori culture, and while we did get a taste of that, there was also a certain nostalgia in being surrounded by the arts and stories that would learn as children, even if we hardly ever saw them again.
As immigrants to New Zealand, we had hoped to grow closer, relate better with the Māori community, but we found that these snippets of culture that we thought were distinct from ourselves were more like veins that ran through the country and touched on small but recurring aspects of our lives.
We may not be able to communicate in te reo Māori or recite folklore by heart, but the excitement that rises in our chests when Māori culture is recognized and acknowledged, the surge of pride we feel as we witness a powerful haka performed around the world, is not something that we can put a label on.
We appreciate the culture. We can share and enjoy the food, learn the stories, and talk to the people. We feel welcomed, we feel at home, and we feel part of the community. And that's what Te Ahi Kōmau. That's what festivals like these are all about.
That was definitely not what I was expecting, and it was bigger than I thought it would be as well. The food is great, especially if we've never had anything like that before, because despite it being New Zealand, it's not that common to see Polynesian food except for in ethnic neighborhoods, which I think is a huge shame.
The performances were so beautifully done, especially because I think a lot of them were done by college students.
It's different in person as it is on camera. In person you get a little bit more of the subtleties, and the lights on the trees whose branches are moving in the wind is a completely different effect to the stark colors that you see on the camera. It is a sight to see.
Even though we were there from all the way at the beginning to up until closing time, it felt like time went by really fast. They had so many performances, so many things to see, and just the feeling of community that they brought in that short amount of time that they had together was really, really wonderful to see.
As long as you pre-order some of the dishes, such as the Hungi or the fried bread at the end, it is worth it. It's fantastic.
This is an annual event and I hope it keeps going. This is the first or maybe the second time it's happened, and this is the first time we'd heard of it, but I'm so glad we went. If you have any sort of opportunity to find any sort of marae experience, I would highly recommend giving it a go. If you're in New Zealand or any Polynesian island, that is a culture you have to experience.
This was a special event, but we are continuing our trip in Japan following this video, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Otherwise, for all the information that we mentioned,
as well as some of the history and culture that we personally learned in this event,
you can check out our blog article, which we linked in the description below.
As to where we are now, follow us on Instagram at TwinspeakEatGo. We'll see you next time. Bye!